What up, guys? The Bench Buddies are back with our college football Week 10 preview and picks. As always, I have my guy Ty joining me here to break down this week's games. Before we get into it, subscribe to the channel. Once we hit 500 subscribers, we'll be doing a giveaway. So make sure you guys are subscribed. And then we'll look at last week's results. And yeah, there were a few upsets. Obviously, we both got some wrong. But besides the Oklahoma game, Ty, which one kind of stood out to you the most and kind of turned your head a little bit?
I'd say probably the Georgia game because they're starting to look like the Georgia of the last 2 years. Obviously, they had struggled through a couple games early in the season, but their last few games have been pretty dominant. So, a couple tougher games for them coming up. So we'll see if they can continue to live up to their past expectations.
Yeah, for me, I'm going with the Oregon-Utah game. I thought this one was going to be, at least closer. Obviously, we both picked Oregon to win this one, but the way they did was super convincing, and that's why they're the number 6 team in the country right now. And a slip up in Washington in that Michigan-Ohio State game, if Oregon wins out, it's hard for me to not see them make the college football playoff. They've just been that good this year. But we'll kick off this week at 12 on ABC, a big game for both of these programs. Notre Dame still has the fighting chance to make a Big Six bowl. You know, they got New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. They could possibly find themselves into one of those bowls, the New Year's Six. But then you got Clemson, 4-4. I don't think anyone had them losing 4 games this early. And it's, both you and I are going to go with Notre Dame here, and Clemson's going to have 5 losses this year.
Yeah, I just think Notre Dame has much more firepower and a lot better vibes, to be honest, going for them right now. Clemson's just had a lot of really bad losses, and I think it continues even on the road. I think Notre Dame's defense and running game is just going to be too much.
And then you have Ohio State and Rutgers, and it seems like the narrative Ohio State plays tougher opponents than, our counterpart Michigan when they play the same exact teams. It's not the same story, but you got number one Buckeyes going on the road. And I like that spread 18.5 in a road conference game. It always kind of seems to be a little bit closer than expected on the road. So I would take the Rutgers spread here. But Ohio State, they're the number one team in the country for a reason. So I got to go with the Buckeyes straight up.
Yep, I agree. I think it's going to be another kind of grinded out game, like we saw with Indiana and Wisconsin for Ohio State, like a 24-3 type of game. Ohio State's defense is elite, one of the best in the country. But will we see Kyle McCord improve before the Michigan game? And that's something that we'll have to see this week as well.
And a battle in the SEC, a big game for A&M if they want to keep their hopes alive. And same kind of for Ole Miss here. And I'm going with the Rebels. Jackson Dart has looked good this year, and this is going to be one of those games where he's going to have to step up and make big plays to keep their very good season going. And they win this game, they could possibly find themselves in a dogfight for that last SEC championship spot. They need a few other things to happen, of course.
Yeah, I think Texas A&M could give Ole Miss a little bit of a run for their money here. That's why the line is so small. But frankly, I've watched A&M a couple games this year. They just look like a poorly coached team, and I think that's going to come back to bite them again this Saturday. I think Ole Miss, especially at home, is just going to be too much in the end, and Jimbo is going to make one too many mistakes.
And then a big game in the Big 12, Kansas State, Texas. And obviously, Texas coming off a big win against BYU. And Kansas State just keeps on grinding out games and get their ranking to 23. And, this is one of those games just like that Texas A&M Ole Miss game that it could be close, possibly a last possession. Texas kicks a game-winning field goal, scores a touchdown. And I think I can kind of see it going that way. Ewers obviously still out, and it's Malik Murphy's show. And yeah, he played well, but he's playing a much better team this week, better coach defense. And I like Texas here, but don't be too shocked if they somehow get upset.
Yeah, I agree. I think Kansas State is going to be right there the whole game. I just think Texas has enough playmakers where they will make one more play than the Wildcats do. But don't be surprised if the Wildcats do pull this off. This will be a really close, good game to watch in the noon window.
Then moving to that 3:30 slate, Missouri, Georgia, and my heart is telling me take Mizzou here on the road, but my brain's telling me I got to stick with Georgia and the dogs, and that's what I'm going to do. I think Missouri is going to give them a run for their money, and I think it'll be almost tied. Maybe Georgia's down at half, but those Bulldogs come out in the second half and play much better football, and I think that's what gets them to the win here.
Yeah, like I said in the opening, I think Georgia has started to look like the Georgia of the last 2 years. And that's unfortunate for Missouri because I don't think you could have asked for anything more if you're Missouri. They're playing to get to Atlanta, basically, in this game. If they beat Georgia, they control the SEC East. Unfortunately, with this game at Sanford Stadium and the way Georgia's playing, I don't see any way this game is even within 2 touchdowns. I think Georgia runs away with it.
Then on ABC, a big in-state rivalry, Oklahoma State. And Oklahoma obviously last week came off a ugly loss, if you want to say. I mean, Kansas is a good football team, but it was unexpected, that's for sure. Then Oklahoma State, the Cowboys could, ruin the Sooners' chances of getting into that playoff. And I don't think that's going to happen this week. The Sooners and Dylan Gabriel have to respond. And, what better way in a rivalry game to respond and put up a good show on ABC primetime television? I think it's too much for those Cowboys.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is just what Oklahoma needs. Obviously, the vibes are pretty low coming off that upset loss, but they're playing their hated rival this week. So, exactly the type of game that they can get back up for. And they really just own Oklahoma State, to be completely honest. If you look at the series, the overall series, I don't know exactly what it is, but it's like 90-20 or something crazy. And I think that'll continue this year. Oklahoma wins on the road.
And then moving to the night slate at 7, Kansas, Iowa State, who we were just talking about. And the Jayhawks are going to get another win. Jason Bean has looked great now that he's had to start instead of Jalen Daniels. And, ISU is favored at home here and interesting, and which could possibly swing the Big 12 in one way or another. If Kansas wins, they're still in the hunt. If Iowa State wins, then it kind of eliminates Kansas, and it's only going to be a few teams. I got the Jayhawks winning here, moving to 7-2, and putting together back-to-back nice seasons.
Yeah, I agree. I think for most teams coming off an emotional win like Kansas just had, this is a perfect opportunity for a letdown going on the road at night. But I think Kansas is just too well coached by Lance Leipold. I think they're going to be ready for this game. And Iowa State, while they've improved a lot this year, they still don't quite have the talent that Kansas does, which I never thought I would say. But I think Kansas is going to be just good enough on Saturday to get the road win.
And then at 7:30, a huge game in the Pac-12. If USC wins, then it's a whole shakeup in that conference. But if Washington wins, they're pretty much going to start to run away with it, only with 3 games left. And I think the Huskies are going to do it. Michael Penix Jr. against this defense just seems unfair. We've seen what USC's defense has done these last few weeks, and they let Cal score 49 on them last week. That's concerning for me. And if Michael Penix can play half as good with his, wide receivers Rome and I forget the other guy's name, but the other one too, that duo is going to be tough to stop. And I just don't see a way that USC's defense can stop Washington. Yeah, I know it's a home game for the Trojans, but I mean, come on here. We got the Huskies and a potential Heisman winner in Michael Penix Jr. here. It just makes too much sense.
Yeah, I think this is going to be one of the best games to watch all year. You see the over under 76.5. They're predicting an absolute shootout. And I don't see how we won't get that, to be honest, unless Washington just blows them out. Obviously, USC does not really care to play defense, but I do think they're going to be able to get this home win. People forget they only have one conference loss, so they're still right there in the Pac 12. And if Washington didn't struggle with two very bad teams the last 2 weeks, I would pick them to win, but they did. So going on the road, I think Caleb Williams has a bounce back game, lights up the defense, and USC has the ball last and scores and wins the game.
And then on NBC, the game we'll be watching until halftime because it'll be such a blowout. Michigan, Purdue, and obviously we got to bring up the sign stealing scandal and everything surrounding that. But unfortunately, this team is not getting enough credit for what they're doing on the field. Obviously everyone's on Harbaugh and the scandal, but what Michigan is doing on the field, beating teams by an average of 20 points or more, and it's not, bad teams. I want to say it's still Big Ten. They're still in a good conference. Obviously haven't played Penn State and Ohio State yet, but McCarthy's been efficient, and this ground game is not the same as it was last year, but they're going to hit their stride at some point, and I think it might be this game against Purdue, who's very bad, and they might pound the rock in this one and get Corum and Edwards going into the thick of the schedule.
Yeah, I think that's what they need to do. They got to get the running game back to at least close to where it was last year. But yeah, the sign stealing thing is a lot of people would think it's a distraction. But I think the players really just have their heads down and they're going to let that decide itself, whether it's the NCAA or the Big Ten. They're going to control what they can control, as you saw with the Michigan State game. And I think that'll continue here. Purdue's not a good football team, and I think Michigan will have no trouble. I wouldn't be surprised if they covered that in the first half. Maybe that's just bias talking, but I think Michigan, whether they deserve to be or not, I think this is an angry football team right now, and I think they're going to just take that out on Purdue this week.
Then at 7:45, pretty much a game that might decide the SEC, at least one side of the SEC. Tigers and the Crimson Tide. And, it's hard to bet against Bama at home. And I can't do it this week. I'm going with Alabama at home. And Jalen Milroe, since he became officially the starter in week, I think it was 6 or 7, he has looked much better than he did at the beginning of the year. LSU, they're out for a second straight win in this series. And Bama obviously took that one to heart last year, losing that one in overtime. So I think the Crimson Tide come out here, put a big whooping on them in the first half, and kind of coast to a second half victory.
Yeah, I was thinking Alabama, playing at home, but I just think LSU has their number after last year, and I think they're going to turn this game into a shootout early, and Alabama won't be able to keep up. I think LSU, you could argue, is the best offense in the country. At worst, they're top five. Defense has been the issue, but Alabama doesn't have the Heisman level quarterback that they've had in the past, so I don't think they're going to be able to keep up in a shootout. So I think LSU gets a huge road win here.
And then another big game in the ACC, Miami, who I think got hosed on a college football playoff ranking. I think they should be ranked. And then you got NC State, who's floating around in the ACC standing still, kind of could make a push. And this could be one of those games where NC State gets that win and people start talking about them again. But I don't think that happens. Miami should really be a 7-1 football team, obviously, because they didn't take a knee. And the Hurricanes, they're still flying under the radar. Just because they're not ranked doesn't mean they're not good. And I think they get their 7th win.
Yeah, I agree. I said it last week and they won anyway, but I'm not high on NC State this year. They've had some pretty lackluster performances. And like you said, Miami should be a 7-1 team, and we'd be talking about them completely different than we have been. And I think they're going to be able to get this road win. They just have way more talent than the Wolfpack eventually that talent has to show.
Then moving to the 10 o'clock slate. Yeah, I'm rolling with Boulder and the Buffs again this week. And last week it doesn't help when you get sacked 7 times and hit 15. Shedeur Sanders, I'm talking about. And I think if this O-line can figure out how they can get him sacked less than 5 times, that changes the game. And he didn't really have to do much last week because it was kind of a crapshoot and so on and so forth. And Oregon State, I think, is that team in the Pac-12 that doesn't belong where everyone else is. And I'm not saying that disrespecting Oregon State. They've still put up a great year, 6 wins for sure. But I think now that's the time where we're going to start to see them falter and really struggle in the back half of the year. So that's why I'm going with the Buffs.
Yeah, unfortunately, coming off those 7 sacks, this game might not be much different for Shedeur because that Oregon State defense, especially their defensive front, has been really good all year. So I think the defense is going to lead the way for the Beavers here. I think Colorado covers. This could be a close game, playing at home, night game again. Seems like it always is for them. But I think the Beavers are going to be able to pull this off.
Then the last game we got UCLA, Arizona, and these Wildcats are not getting enough credit for what they've been doing. And they actually just upset Oregon State last week. And I think when this week is over, Arizona gets this win, and you're looking at the first 3-loss team that's getting a ranking because they're not losing to bad teams either. If you go look at their schedule, they've all been close losses, 2 in overtime, and another one that came down right to the wire. It just so happens that they were on the bad side of those games. And, really, we could be talking about an 8-0 Arizona team just if one or two plays go differently in the fourth quarter. But, with all that backstory, I am going with the Wildcats here against the Bruins. The Bruins have been really hit or miss in every single game this year. And it seems like, they didn't play that good last week against Colorado. Obviously, the defense did. But I think this is where the offense doesn't show up and Arizona wins.
Yeah, I agree. Arizona's the best 3-loss team in the country. They have 3 really close losses to good teams. And now they get another home game against a ranked team. And I think they are going to be able to win it again. I think this team is tremendously underrated. And like you said, I think they will end up being ranked if they can win this game. And Dante Moore, freshman quarterback, I think he's going to struggle on the road again.
That's going to be it for our picks and preview this week. Check back next week to see how we did on this week's picks. But until the next time, the Bench Buddies are out.